Hey everyone, Tactics here with my full guide to Chrome King GALLYWIX on both normal and heroic difficulty after defeating the boss on week 1 of the patch. In this video, I'll be giving you the rundown on what's happening in all 3 phases, what our strategy was to handle them, and hopefully give you some extra tips and tricks to help you and your guild get your ahead of the curve achievement. If you're looking for other boss guides, I have a full normal and heroic guide out over on my channel now, and I'll be putting out mythic boss guides over the next few weeks, so make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you know when those get posted. Otherwise, let's talk phase 1. To start, you want to split your raid into 2 even groups here, as the main form of raid damage in this phase comes from the Scatter Blast Canisters ability. This is a tank targeted frontal that covers just over a quarter of the boss room and must be soaked in order to split the damage, so this is where you're going to be taunt swapping in order to alternate which group gets hit. This also debuffs players with Mech Engineer's Canisters, which absorbs a large amount of healing and deals a hit of shadow damage to the player on removal. On heroic, this hit of shadow damage actually hits your entire raid, which drastically increases the healing required in this phase. Because of this, don't be afraid to use things like healing pots or health stones in this phase if you're ever low health with one of those absorbs, as phase 1 is one of the highest damage moments of the entire fight. To make getting into these soaks a bit more problematic, there's a bunch of area denial from the big bad bunch of bombs cast. These are massive player-baited circles that explode after a few seconds, dealing lethal damage to anyone inside, while also throwing out a bunch of bomb circles at random players that you need to avoid again. Sapper's Satchel also gets thrown out on detonation here, which debuffs a few players and explodes in a 7-yard circle after a few seconds, so if you're targeted by this, get away from the group. On heroic difficulty, you'll also find 2 1,500-pound dud bombs that spawn from these big bad bunch of bombs, which tanks have 15 seconds to soak before they explode for heavy raid damage. When doing so, this also deals a large hit of physical damage and applies a stacking dot to the tank, which then again explodes after 10 seconds, however, for significantly less damage than if you would let the bomb explode. Since this does stack, you want to have one tank pick up each bomb and make sure they do it a few seconds apart to avoid having that hit of raid damage on expiration happen at the same time, and just it gives you a few seconds to heal up. Outside of these 2 main mechanics, the boss will occasionally fire off suppression circles at random players we just need to avoid, plus he'll sometimes pulse for additional light group damage in venting heat. You want to keep an eye on that last ability though, as each time the boss casts it, he gains a stack of overheating, increasing its duration by 1 second for the remainder of the fight, so by the time you get to phase 3, this is going to be dealing much more damage than in phase 1. In terms of how I recommend positioning in this phase, we opted to split the room in half down the middle with one group on each side. The ability Cadence always has it so that you're baiting the bomb circles just before group 2 soak. So as an example, using this raid plan picture, we had group 1 eat their first frontal at star, followed by both groups baiting bombs between circle and star, and then group 2 taking their soak at diamond. While doing this on heroic difficulty, the tank from group 1 should immediately run out and soak one of the bombs, and then they taunt back as soon as group 2 has taken their soak, and then the group 2 tank can run out and get their second bomb. From here, it just repeats on the opposite side of the room. So group 1 takes their soak at triangle, both groups bait bombs between diamond and triangle, and then group 2 runs across to circle and does their soak there, and you just repeat this until the phase ends. For tanks in this phase, outside of that frontal and outside of the bombs on heroic, the boss will also channel Gatling Cannon into his current target, dealing drastically increased damage based on distance, so you want to make sure you're actually close to the boss here instead of far. He also stacks up trick shots over time, which deals a large hit with a stacking fire dot either at 10 stacks or when you swap the boss. So when you are taunting, make sure you press a defensive, as the boss is going to hit you with this shortly after. After 2 minutes of doing phase 1, you'll enter phase 2, which continues until you push the boss to 50% health. When this phase starts, a bunch of ads drop down into the arena, which you want to group up and AoE while keeping as many of their casts interrupted as possible, including the group damage from the Technician's Juice It cast, as well as the random target channel from the Sentry's Shock Barrage. These mobs can be gripped and CC'd, so keep them locked down as best you can. While fighting these ads, the boss empowers himself with Giga Coils, dealing pulsing group damage every second and allowing him to target a random ranged player with Giga Blast. This is a large line attack that you want to move out of, but it also empowers the damage from Giga Coils by 10% on normal or 40% on heroic, so the more times you let the boss cast this, the scarier that group pulsing damage becomes. To stop this damage, you'll need to kill the technician mobs, then have a player interact with the bomb that they drop on death and take it to one of the Giga controls on the 4 pillars around the edge of the room. Doing this deals a hit of nature damage to the player with the bomb, but it also destroys the controls that they're near, ending Giga Coils for roughly 1 minute. On Heroic, you also have to make sure you're avoiding the overloaded bolts, which are just small 4-yard circles that constantly spawn while Giga Coils is active. Some notes on this part of the phase: each pillar has 2 separate controls, but if you destroy both of them, then the quarter of the room that they're in is filled with electricity, making it unusable for the remainder of the fight. So what you want to do here is rotate around the room, destroying one set of controls at each pillar before you destroy the second. The first pillar is also always going to be the one in the southeast corner of the room on the triangle marker in the raid plan, so you always want to start by grouping the ads there and then rotate clockwise accordingly. Because ranged bait that giant frontal in this phase, you want to make sure that the ranged are not in the triangle portion of the room, or at least not pointing towards the controls, just to make it easier for whoever picks up the bomb to actually get to those controls and end this phase quickly. In terms of who should be that player depositing the bomb, it doesn't really matter, though of course high mobility classes can get it done faster, so things like monks, mages, demon hunters, they're all great options. To end this damage as quickly as possible, you should also try and focus down one of the technicians specifically and just have an assigned player ready to immediately pick up that bomb and run and deposit it while everyone else cleaves the remaining ads. Note that bombs do continue to drop from every technician you kill here, and they will explode for heavy raid damage if you leave them on the ground, so make sure you have nearby players go up to them, interact with them, and then either throw them into the center of the room in the hole, or throw them off the edge of the platform. Notably, to throw the bombs, you need to press your extra action button again, but if you're assigned to detonating the controls, you just need to walk up to the controls and it should automatically detonate. That being said, there is some additional group damage whenever you destroy a set of Giga controls, as the boss gains a stack of sabotage controls, which is just some random target damage that ramps up over the fight, similar to that previously mentioned venting heat. Now, after you've destroyed the controls and stopped the Giga Coil's damage, the boss flies over to the edge of the room, spawns 2 wrenchmongers that tanks need to pick up, and then begins using a few different abilities. These wrenchmongers just debuff the tank with the wrench damage amp, so ideally, the tank not on the boss picks these guys up and you just cleave them down. On Heroic, they also have Lumbering Rage, so if you have Stews, you can use it on this cast, but overall, these mobs aren't super dangerous. There's one other new ability in this phase, Infused Canisters, which is a soak effect on random players similar to the frontal in phase 1. On normal, this targets 2 random players, so you can split your group in the same way as you did in phase 1, but on heroic difficulty, there's actually 3 soaks here, so you need to make sure that you spread your group evenly such that there's at least 3 players in each soak, but ideally more. For ease, we just made these into a little triangle just in front of the boss so melee could still have uptime, and assigned people to soak left, middle, or right. These soaks, just like in phase 1, also apply the Mech Engineer's Canister Healing Absorb to players hit, so healers be aware, especially on Heroic. Other than that, the boss uses a bunch of phase 1 abilities here, so avoid the suppression circles, beware of the venting heat damage, and run out of the massive bomb circle. For that last one though, it is a bit different, as whenever the boss creates the bomb circle, he flies up 1 quadrant clockwise, so make sure that your raid is ready to follow when this happens. This is also convenient for the boss movement and why we rotate clockwise around the room, as shortly after he flies to a new quadrant, the boss will then head back to the center of the arena and begin the Giga Coils portion of this phase again. This means that as you rotate clockwise, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Giga Coils cast, your group is going to be close to a pillar where you've destroyed 0 controls, so you can safely bomb it without filling that quadrant with electricity. Tanks are also dealing with these same 2 mechanics we discussed earlier in Gatling Cannon and Trick Shots. However, on Heroic, how you soak the bombs is going to be a bit different here. As I mentioned, the boss moves as he creates the bombs, so the tank on the boss needs to follow him and stay with him to not have that extra distance damage from Gatling Cannon. So the other tank who's not on the boss is going to soak their bomb first, and ideally, they soak the bomb furthest from where the boss is, just to make the movement for the second tank a bit easier. Once they go and get their bomb, they can then run back to the boss, quickly taunt, and then the tank that was on the boss can run out and get their bomb, which is hopefully closer. They can also then choose to taunt back if you want tanks doing the same job in this phase. It doesn't really matter here, as outside of the bomb soaking, there's no need to do a tank swap in phase 2. Once you push the boss to 50% health, the intermission begins, with GALLYWIX landing inside of a mech suit, causing him to gain an absorb shield as he begins to channel total destruction. This ability deals increasing group damage every second for 30 seconds and can't be interrupted until you destroy that shield, so you need to destroy it before your healers are overwhelmed. This is a pretty good spot to use Bloodlust here, as it helps you destroy that shield quickly and end this phase. However, keep in mind that the boss continues to take full damage even after the shield is destroyed, so if you aren't scared of dying to the damage yet, you can hold your interrupt and just keep hitting the boss to get a bit of extra damage going into phase 3. On Heroic here, you're also going to want to watch out for the 3 lines of radiant electricity that rotate around the boss during this phase, as they will stun any one hit. These beams are relatively short though, so ranged players don't need to worry about them. You can just stand at max range and plant, whereas melee will need to make sure that they are moving with them. That brings us to the final phase of the fight. Well, right at the start, you're going to see the newly empowered Bigger, Badder Bomb Blast ability, which now, instead of being a random target circle you'll run out of, is now centered around the active tank, so they need to run it away from the group to prevent it from cleaving players. Note that at least on week 1 of the patch, the animation for this circle did not actually match the hitbox of it, so you want to make sure the tank here is giving a lot of space for the rest of your raid, and that everyone in your raid who is not that tank, including the off tank, is stacked behind the boss to ensure that they are not hit. When this explosion goes off, you've still got to deal with avoiding these smaller bomb circles as well as the tank bombs on heroic difficulty, but the random target sapper satchel debuffs have been replaced with overloaded rockets, which shoot out lines from several players that you need to make sure you're avoiding. These shoot off after 5 seconds, so I recommend having the targeted players use the first 2 seconds or so of the debuff to just move away from the boss, and then you use the last 3 to plant and allow non-debuffed players to avoid you. Being near the boss is also good for the non-debuffed players for the new soak mechanic in TikTok canisters, which are just small circles that spawn near the boss's feet. Just like the previous phases, these soaks apply that healing absorb, so be aware, but unlike previous phases, you don't need your entire raid to participate here. As long as you have around 3 players per soak, or even just a single tank, the damage there is survivable. Both suppression circles and venting heat continues in this phase, and that's where the venting heat starts to get a bit dangerous, as the boss will have stacked up quite a bit depending on how long it took you to get to 50% health. Suppression circles also get a bit more dangerous in this phase, as shortly after the cast, GALLYWIX does an AoE hit around himself in GALLYWIX's Finale Blast, so your group will want to make sure that they run away from the boss when this happens, as the damage you take from this ability is decreased based on distance. He also continues to occasionally fly to the center of the room and use Giga Coils, just like he did in Phase 2, which means you need to continue your clockwise movement around the room, destroying 1 set of controls at a time after cleaving technicians, and then depending on how long your fight actually goes, this may start to eliminate space in your room 1 quadrant at a time as you do your second rotation of the room. For tanks in this phase, on normal difficulty, all you have to worry about is that Bigger, Badder Bomb circle around you, as the boss loses his Gatling gun and trick shots abilities once hopping into the mech. This does put a 1.5 minute debuff on you, so that's going to be your taunt swap. On heroic, that blast also still spawns those bombs, as I mentioned, so have the tank that took the circle out grab the furthest bomb, while the tank with the boss can grab the closest one. On top of this, the boss gains a new tank buster on heroic difficulty in Ego Check, which is a big physical hit that applies 75% of unmitigated damage as a stacking dot to you. Very similar to Rashnon's tank buster from Nurbar Palace, if you remember that. As I mentioned, you're going to be swapping on the bomb circle cast, so you're not swapping on this cast, so you really want to make sure you are pressing damage mitigation buttons on Ego Check to reduce the danger of that dot as it stacks up on you. That is it for the Chrome King GALLYWIX on normal and heroic, guys. Hopefully this video helps you guys get ahead of the curve, and if it did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more guide content like it, including boss guides out right now for every other boss on normal and heroic, as well as mythic boss guides coming out in the near future. As always, I need to give a massive thank you to all my amazing Patreons for their continued support, and I'll see everyone in the next video.